What's up? I am Miguel Antonio, and this is the Live and Create podcast. It's where I talk to artists and entrepreneurs about living a great life and creating great things. This is the pre-COVID edition. It's a series of interviews that I did back in 2019, but even though a year has gone by and a whole lot of things have happened, I wanted to get these people's stories out to you. Today's guest is Eric Ryan Johnson. He's a music performer and educator out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. We dive into topics ranging from 1921 race riots and massacre that happened right in Tulsa, all the way to his philosophy behind education and what it can do to inspire people to live a great life. I hope you guys enjoy.
The Live and Create podcast.
If you're going to live in Oklahoma, Tulsa's the place to live.
Yeah. Well, man, I'm just impressed with, and we're rolling too, just as a heads up.
Okay.
But I'm impressed with what is out here. Just my short knowledge of like the baristas I talked with, I was like, what's going on in the music scene out here? And because that was one of my goals on this tour, is just to meet as many folks as I could, learn about each kind of area that I'm going through. Yeah. And it's like, you guys got a lot going on in
so
Tulsa.
Much. When I moved here 20 years ago, you could park anywhere you wanted, in the middle of the street, on the sidewalk.
Which, as I experienced this morning, you can't do.
You can't do anymore. And so I keep telling myself, this is a good problem as I drive around and trying to find a place.
Like, we have more people, and this is good,
but
right?
I have to pay for parking now. But the whole Brady Arts District, it's now called the Tulsa Arts District, renaming, just north of here.
Yeah.
When I first moved here, there were a few art galleries and a couple bars, but now it's a bunch of satellite museums. The Woody Guthrie Center is there. It's amazing.
Nice.
There's the Guthrie Green, which is a big lawn concert area.
Really?
I don't know if you got to see that.
I have not seen it. I just kind of rolled in yesterday, met you guys at the Foolish
shop,
Things, right? And then I had to head out to my show, my house show.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, you got to head over there. Just go over the bridge
and check it out.
Yeah, check it out. So,
that's cool.
It's kind of sad that this bridge divides everything, from. And that's one thing I noticed when I first moved here to Tulsa, where you still feel the effects of the 1921 massacre.
So I saw some stuff about that. What is that?
Well, it was originally called the Race Riot.
Okay.
But what happened was there was an altercation, conversation, somebody bumped into somebody was accosted. It was hard to tell, from historical accounts, but what happened was there was a mass attack on the north side of Tulsa, which was largely
kind of like a retaliation thing in a sense, or?
Right. So I live in a historic neighborhood on the Heights, and our house was bought new in 1919 by a Dr. Wall.
Okay.
He was president of the Medical Society of Tulsa for an unprecedented 2 years, and he was going to move back to Oklahoma City, where he had previously lived. And there was actually in our abstract was some paperwork where he was going to sell to a man named Ira Short. He was the county commissioner-elect of Tulsa. And the night before the race riot, I believe it was the night before, he was called to the courthouse. Ira Short was by the sheriff to protect the prisoner, the African-American man.
So there was a mob basically going after him.
Right, they were going to lynch him.
Wow.
One of them stood on the roof, and the other one stood on the steps with their shotguns, and they dispersed the crowd.
They did, okay.
And that's when the crowd apparently went and started their massacre.
So they went into the community and just unleashed on who they found.
There's a little hill just over the highway, and in the 50s and 60s, people used to go up there and make out and stuff, but it's called Standpipe Hill, and that's where the National Guard put their Gatling gun and trained it in North Tulsa.
And they just started shooting?
Yep.
Anyone?
And there were firebombs dropped from airplanes.
Oh, shit.
Whole neighborhoods set ablaze. There's an area that's known as Black Wall Street. It's over by the new baseball stadium.
Okay.
There's lots of plaques in the sidewalk of where the businesses used to be.
Yeah.
And very little that was left standing.
And they're dropping literal bombs on civilians.
Yeah. There were theaters, and it was a thriving business district for the black community.
Man.
And so lots of jealousy, hatred, and racism, of course. But Dr. Wall decided not to sell our house and stay here for another 30 years. After the massacre, he and the Medical Society of Tulsa helped raise funds and get equipment for the African-American doctors because they all worked out of their homes.
Gotcha. Was he African-American as well?
No, he wasn't.
Okay.
Nor were any of the doctors in the Medical Society. They were all white.
Yeah.
So the exclusion.
I guess at that time it was kind of the thing.
And if you were African-American, you weren't going to be going to a hospital. You weren't allowed.
You weren't allowed at all?
Yeah.
Like, wasn't even a case, can't afford it?
No,
coming from poverty?
I don't think you would have been allowed to.
That's wild.
So they all went to black doctors, and they all lost their places of practice in the riot. And so a lot of people were put at a field called McNulty Field. It's over where the Home Depot is.
Okay.
And, if you were picked up on the street or if you were injured or you were basically imprisoned in the field. So
that's wild. And this is 1920.
1921.
So just about 100 years.
Yeah.
And that's just not that long ago.
No, it's
not. And that's what's wild.
We up until recently we've had survivors and heard about the stories and things, but I've talked to adults who growing up here in Tulsa never learned about it. It was
well, that's what I'm thinking.
Whitewashed, they weren't taught about it, and they were very surprised to hear it when they were adults that this happened here.
Yeah. So. How many people do they know, or do they know how many people died?
I think it was the most in the country, and I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head. But.
And I grew up in Kansas, and so it's honestly baffling to me that something to that extent we would have at least been taught as well, and then to hear even people in Tulsa don't know.
Right, and then in this time period, this was happening all over the country too. So
God. So how do you still see those kind of effects? Do you see that imprinted on the psyche here in Tulsa?
Definitely. It took a long time for us to get a gas station on the north side of Tulsa.
Yeah, no one wanted to go. They didn't want to touch it.
Right, and it's like people on my side of town. We need groceries. We need gasoline. We need services. So.
Do you see? So obviously. You're a musician, right? Do you see music playing a role in healing some of that racial divide, or does it?
Definitely. Okay. We're here at the Oklahoma Jazz Hall,
which is a very nice hall.
Yeah,
thanks for putting that together.
Jason McIntosh, letting us use it. But it brings together people from all cultures, all ethnic backgrounds. That's a wonderful thing about jazz and blues.
Yeah, it is true.
So
I had another guest recently, a guy named Eddie Moore. He's a jazz pianist out of Kansas City, tours to Costa Rica quite often, and starting to bring some of the musicians they play with out there back to Kansas City. And we had a lot of conversation around similar ideas of just race relations and how music can be this great divide of it. So, sorry, I interrupted you there.
But I was, before we started, I was telling you a little bit about the high school that I used to teach at, and it was Booker T. Washington High School, and it was integrated, and white students were bused in. It was a historic black school.
Okay.
And so it's a wonderful place for students of all ethnic backgrounds, and we have a number of schools here in Tulsa that are very similar in their ethnic makeup, and so there's a lot of good things that Tulsa has going for it, but we're still fighting a lot of the effects of that 1921
even 100 years
massacre.
Yeah,
right.
And that's what it is wild. Like it in some ways it seems foreign. I feel like I'm lucky enough to meet many people who just don't have that perspective of racism and bigotry,
right?
But in reality, it's still deep, unfortunately, in the country.
I think one of the first things I realized when I before we moved here, I came to look for a place to live, and my wife was going to be going to the University of Tulsa, which is a little bit south and east of downtown. Okay. And everybody said, "Well, don't look north." And I was like, "Well, why?" And I didn't really want. I wanted to stay around the university anyway, so that's where we ended up renting a place. But after I rented the place, I I drove north and I saw homes like what I had lived in Minneapolis, and families sitting out on porches and neighbors together. And,
more community vibe.
I'm like, oh, yeah.
What's wrong with the North?
I know, exactly. And then I went to a grocery store after we moved here, and I let a woman go in the door in front of me, held the door for her, African-American woman, older, and she looked at me with surprise on her face and said, well, thank you. And I was like, well, this is just a normal thing for me.
Yeah.
But it was not a normal thing for her.
Right.
To have a white man open the door.
It's something she had an experience of living in the North town.
And so that both those things kind of had an effect on me.
Yeah.
And so
that's huge.
Yeah.
That's really huge.
Yeah.
That's my oldest son is African American, and like for me growing up, I grew up I'm Puerto Rican, German. My uncle married a black woman. Like I just grew up in this mixture of races and cultures. So racism to me, in my mind, didn't exist anymore. Like those concepts didn't hit me. But then seeing life through his eyes, and even getting to meet his dad and getting to know his dad, seeing life through his eyes as an African American male in the suburban world of Kansas City, kind of again just exposed me like, oh wait, the rest of the world doesn't always work like that. What seems normal to me is not at all. And wow. Well,
I feared for my students when I was teaching high school. I talked to a number of them who had just gotten pulled over for driving black.
Yep.
You know,
and that's what they were experiencing.
I've gotten pulled over before, you know, driving back from visiting my 90-year-old father in Wisconsin. Yeah. I've gotten pulled over because I have long hair.
Right.
And immediately assumed that I have drugs on me or something, and of course I don't do anything.
Right.
So, but you know, I totally understand. I totally understand. In this world today, we see it still omnipresent in our society, racism. And that's one of the things I think that music really does well at. We can bring people together. You can go to a concert hall and see lots of different ethnicities. And I don't think it used to be like that, you know.
Yeah.
100 years ago.
And that's what's cool about the internet is like different genres are all mixing together, which then brings out a whole slew of different kinds of people. Where I know a lot of people look down on it in the arts world, but Lil Nas X still like, it's just exciting to me to see here's a gay black man who's got the #1 country song. And I'm like, all right, the game has completely changed. Yeah. Like there are open doors all across the board.
I don't know if you've ever heard the Afro-Celt music.
Afro-Celt. Okay, I have not.
You know, that was, I don't know, probably 20 years ago, but it's pretty cool. You know,
I have to check it out.
Hearing Irish music with lots of different rhythms mixed to it. And, you know, people, being an Irish musician myself, you know, when Riverdance came out, everybody's like, whew, that's Irish music. It's more Eastern European rhythms.
Gotcha. You're sitting there like, no.
You know, that kind of stuff put with Irish fiddle, you know.
Yeah.
It's exciting, and it was different, and it was new, and it caught a lot of people's attention, and it got a lot of people into Irish music again, and that was wonderful.
It can be the gateway to where you're like, hey, check out this and this.
But I totally understand. You know, I play with a lot of people who want to maintain the purity of Irish music and play it like it used to be too. But it has changed so much. It changed in the 70s when people started putting guitar with it. But it even changed before that when people started putting piano with Irish music in the 20s.
Yeah.
You know, a fiddler would
just
go in,
fiddle?
Yeah, it would be a lot of music played in unison.
Okay.
And so you would go to like a fiddler like Michael Coleman, go into a recording studio to make a 78 recording, and they'd just pull in a pianist from the concert hall or something to play. And it's hilarious because you can hear the pianist playing in the wrong key. You know, he doesn't hear the chord changes. Just keeps going.
He's just doing his thing.
Doing his thing. And
but it broke some boundaries and expanded the art in a way?
It did, yeah. And, you know, and I've heard stories about in Ireland, even into the 1960s, that people didn't have electricity, you know. They were still cranking their Victrola.
They're still doing it. Yeah. Now, have you been to Ireland and performed out there?
Not,
Is that
I have
okay?
No. So We were talking about a little bit before if I've toured and I was busy raising my son.
Yeah, that'll do it. Those kids take up a lot.
Program. And so I've been thinking a lot more about performing. I released, I re-recorded a CD that I had originally done in 2002 and I wasn't happy with it.
Yeah.
So I redid that.
It's the perpetual artist thing. It's like, I hate this.
Yeah. And I always tell myself nothing's perfect. That's one word with my students. I tell parents, cross off that word from your vocabulary.
Right.
Perfect. And so I have to understand that myself and when I'm doing recordings, that nothing's perfect. And sometimes mistakes are the best things.
Yeah. The surprising things where you're like, oh, let's keep that.
Yeah,
that was actually, I remember there's actually a song on an album I released in my former band where I hit the wrong chord and it went to this minor feel. And just because it was a long day in the studio, my brain, is just kind of crapping out on me. And we ended up, that's ended up being the harmonic structure underneath because that actually felt better.
Yeah.
Let's go with that, know, and that can work out.
Yeah. Yeah. There's lots of little things that, song doesn't cut off how you want it or whatever.
Yeah.
Keep it.
Now you do Celtic music, right?
Irish
music.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm messing up.
Well, Celtic is like a little bit more everything like Scottish and Welsh. And
okay. So it's
Breton.
See, all these things I need to learn.
Yeah.
So Irish music.
Irish.
And you're playing the
music.
fiddle in that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's the difference between fiddle and violin?
I had a 5-year-old tell me that once. He said the difference between a fiddle and a violin is a violin has strings and a fiddle has strands. It's like you can play fiddle music on an expensive violin and you can play classical music on a
It's all approach.
It's how you play it.
Yeah.
It's how you play it. It's the ornaments, the bowing, things like that.
Right on. And you do rock as well, playing guitar and singing,
trying to
writing?
Get more back into that. Yeah, I just released an album on that of rock, alt rock.
Right.
I don't know. I don't even know how to describe it. I keep asking people, "What do you think?" So, and it's kind of all over the place. Some of the songs go way back to college that I was never happy with, and I didn't ever have fiddle on them.
Yeah.
And then some of them are more new. I recorded it in 3 weeks and put it out.
Yeah.
So just got it out there.
Just get it going. I did a writing exercise for a while where I think it was about 3 months straight where I forced myself to write, I think it was 1 to 2 songs a day. But I can only have 1 hour to do it.
Yeah.
Now, and again, these were like bones of songs, not like fully produced by any means, but it was just like, because I got in that point where I would obsess and, it was a cool exercise to just like, let's get this thing out and force some creativity out of there.
Use this thing. The voice memos.
I
have like
thousands of voice memos going.
Yeah, and so that's what I've used this for. I'm driving in the car, I'm singing. When I want to write music, for all you composers out there, I stop listening to music.
Yeah.
I can't listen to anything. And then all of a sudden, like about a week into it, all this flood of ideas comes into my head. And
Get kind of in your own head
Yep.
and figure out what's in there.
Just keep recording them. And so I did something very similar to what you were talking about writing a tune a day, and that was my second album called From Within.
Nice.
I wrote 33 tunes all in a row.
That's awesome, man.
And so a lot of those ended up on my second album. And it's kind of fun when I was doing it. I would print them out, I'd record them, put them on Facebook, either video or audio. And my students kept following along, and every time they come in for lesson, there'd be another 6 or 7 tunes up on the wall, and I just taped them up on the wall all the way around the room from my teaching studio. And they were just like, wow. And so I learned a lot about writing Irish music in the Irish style. From that, and what to do, what was successful, what didn't work,
and then getting the feedback from students.
And then I started teaching them to write.
That's cool.
And some of them really went with that and really loved it. So
that's fun. That's really, I taught privately a long time ago, and it's been cool to see some of these kids where I met them at 12, 13, where some of them are forming their own careers out in the music world. You know, like I don't think I have necessarily a direct role in that. Some of them I just kind of knew or taught 1 or 2 lessons, but it's cool just like tracking them and see how like that little spark of inspiration can lead them to fall in love with it and then find their own way and make their own way in the music world. How many students do you have? Private?
I have about 25 right now.
25, right on. So what started teaching for you?
When I was young, my parents said that my brother, they thought he started kindergarten too young.
Okay.
And so they wanted to wait a year for me, so I would be older for kindergarten. And they looked around for something for me to do. And they saw an ad in the paper for a violin teacher, Ernest Donkey. And they recognized his name from my sister's middle school, that he was the violin teacher there, orchestra director.
They're like, okay, so he's legit.
So they're like, okay, we'll start violin lessons, something called the Suzuki Method.
Yeah.
And Suzuki believed that every child could learn.
That's awesome.
And that learning music was like learning language, and that we learn from listening. And you know, in the 40s, post-war era, there were 2 aspects of that. There were only, if you even going way back in classical music, the only people that played were wealthy or sons of composers, right? And not everybody had access to learning music or playing music. But then with the invention of like the Victrola and records and the recording industry coming along, especially after World War II, Suzuki thought, this is how students learn. And even at that time period, there were only about 3 master teachers coming up with this idea that children could learn.
Yeah.
Or Suzuki. And so it was kind of a novel approach.
Yeah.
And
a way to disseminate it to ideally the masses, in a sense.
And Suzuki had another idea. A big part of his teaching was that music could change the world. In fact, that's what Pablo Casals said about the Suzuki Method.
That's awesome.
That he really thought that music could change the world. That's a Casals quote. But Suzuki, he didn't teach just because he wanted to teach music. He taught because he wanted to nurture students to have a kind heart and a gentle soul.
Yeah, and find it through the discipline and the passion that you find in music.
And so when you sent me some questions about being an artist, being a performer, and it's why do I teach? Why do I play music? And I think that's a big part of it. It's getting the emotion out there when you perform or when you write a song. And I've gone through last 3-4 years have been pretty emotional for me, and it's helped with my songwriting. You look back on the Beatles, it's like, well, Paul McCartney, he wrote some great songs, but John's,
those are the ones that make you cry.
Yeah. And that's the thing that made them so great, that they were all working together on that.
And bringing the emotion into it.
Yeah.
So for you, it sounds like teaching is this idea of inspiring others, inspiring youth to grow these characters, not just the music, but to grow in character.
Right. Yeah. And some students, they're like me growing up. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I got in high school and I was in a hardcore punk rock band. And a
violin sits in front of you, that's what I love.
Yeah. And, my violin teacher, he was so nice. And he knew I was still in music, and he didn't mind that I wasn't practicing this thing.
See, that's cool. My classical teacher in college for voice, he basically said, I will not teach you if you continue in your rock band that I was leading. And it's a long story, but we ended up working it out. But he was very like, I convinced him otherwise.
Yeah,
But he basically said, don't come back.
Yeah.
And it's that's cool to hear that he was very open to like you exploring other different genres even as you learn this method.
And I got to college in my freshman year as a violin major. And my professor, Tyrone Grieve, I talked to him later about this, but he pulled me aside into his office in the spring semester that first year, and he said, Eric, violin's not right for you. You're not practicing. And I was devastated.
Yeah.
I went to a practice room and cried. I was like, what the heck am I going to do?
Exactly. That would be hard to think.
I never wanted to teach at that time. I wanted to perform, not necessarily violin.
Punk band, punk rock performance. That was it.
But, I was playing bass guitar in a show choir. We were doing like jazz standards and stuff. And I was doing a lot of different kinds of music.
Yeah.
And I kind of pushed back against the punk rock at the time. And, we started another band, a rock band, and played at some bars and stuff like that. And that was fun. I'm still in contact with those guys.
That's awesome.
But, and then after that, moved to Minneapolis for 4 years. But before we moved, we went to an Irish music concert in Madison. My wife and I, her being Irish descent, and me just having a little bit of Irish in me.
Just enough.
I think it's in here. But we stumbled into this concert, and it turned out to be a super group of Irish musicians.
Nice.
Kevin Burke, Andy Irvine, Jackie Daly.
Stumbled into a great group at this moment.
A group, Patrick Street. I think it was their first show of their first tour. And it was amazing. And afterwards, my wife said to me, you could do that. And I'm like, yeah, I'd be up for trying that.
Nice.
I didn't even have my fiddle with me. It was at my parents', and so I went and got it and started practicing and
put some strings on it.
Yeah, put some strings on it. And we went up to Minneapolis, moved there for 4 years, and I started getting more involved in the Irish community and playing Irish music. Really had some people that helped me out: Jody Dowling, Tom Klein, Kate Wade. We formed a band, played dances and things like that. I really saw the importance of the dancing with the music. And
it is that energy
right.
when you hear a great Irish band that just like grabs you, pulls you in.
But I really got more into playing.
Yeah.
And by the time we moved down here, after living here for 20 years, I've gotten more involved in getting back to my classical playing and practicing. Trying to keep up with my students.
And raise a son.
But, trying to inspire people who don't know what they want to do for a living, and I don't think you have to know right away. There's people out there that are like, what am I doing with my life? I'm in college. I've played music all my life. Am I a musician? Am I going to be a musician? You don't have to decide.
Right.
Just
some days I feel like I'm still deciding. I'll be in the, like I'm on tour right now and I'm driving down. I'm like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
Am I really supposed to be? Okay, I am. Okay, keep going.
Yeah.
But I feel like it changes too, and I think that's
Nothing
you can explore different lives in a sense. I owned a roofing company for a while. And it's like, but I learned so much from that experience that then I took into the next experience. I worked in nonprofits and it kind of meanders, and I had that perspective where you had to have that one thing. But I really think even down to writing and creating, even if it's not done professionally, all those different experiences you can pull from. And in a way, life's long. You can explore different things.
Choice, like you are given this choice in life. You can do something that you don't like to do to make money, and then do what you love on the side.
Right.
Or you could do what you love to do, and maybe not make any money. But
that can be the all too real
happy
reality.
Or,
right.
Or is there some balance between that? And so I had one of those jobs, like right out of college. I worked at the post office on the graveyard shift, and I was miserable.
Mm-hmm.
And I met so many wonderfully gifted people. There was a guy that was a bow maker, these things, and he couldn't make them because he was working 10 to 12 hours a day, and making a lot of money, but
his passion's gone.
Yeah, so many unhappy people there. I was like, no, I can't do that. And so that's what got me into teaching.
That's cool.
And looking into teaching.
So like figure out how can you apply this music passion in a financially sustainable way. Was that part of it, or simply just let me pursue something that
financially
sustainable way?
I don't know what that is.
Oh, so like,
I'm joking.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Sorry, I'm slow. I see.
It is hard to be a musician, and you have to do a lot. True. And like I stated before, I was trying to do high school teaching, and I was so busy all the time that I found that I wasn't playing. I wasn't loving music. I was working such long hours, teaching till 3:30 at school, coming home and teaching lessons till 8 or 9, and then going to a coffee shop and doing work late and repeat. And it was,
I know that life.
Yeah, it was just nonstop for basically this working for benefits.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to get back to private teaching. I was so happy, like, last year, 3 students of mine, 2 of them that I taught since they were 4 or 5, were all in the Tulsa Youth Symphony, and they were sitting concertmaster, assistant concertmaster in 3rd chair. So 1, 2, 3. So
you're like, this is paying off.
Yeah,
the investment in them.
so proud of all of them. And they might not all be doing music in college, but I know that they love it.
Yeah. When I think that discipline that you learn, I see it in martial arts or sports. My boys, all 4 of my boys are actually into sports, not really music, which is really funny. But the discipline that you learn in practicing some kind of art form, whether it be a physical art or music or graphic arts, I think that discipline and channeling your passion can be applied in so many ways.
Oh, definitely.
Long term.
My son played baseball as well, college baseball, and after his freshman year of college, he came back and played in men's league here, and he had his worst pitching outing he ever had. And we had one of those silent car rides home. You ever had those?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You're like, what,
no one wants to really say
what
anything.
Could I say?
It's like, so that was rough.
Yeah. And so we're riding home and driving home, and he says to me, Dad, I should thank you for all those violin lessons. I never have. And I'm like, why? Why this now? And he said, well, I was out on the pitching mound, and I was horrible. And I just, it was like being at a recital, and you play a bad note, and you just have to go on.
Wow.
And that's a life lesson right there. You make mistakes in life.
Yeah.
I've made oodles of them, and you have to go on, and you have to find the good. You have to find what you do well, and not do it just for yourself, but for others. There's a lot of self-love stuff out there, and being like kind of depressed a few years going back and stuff. I read all this. You gotta love yourself. It's like, I think a lot more of it comes from caring about other people.
Yeah,
I find the whole self-love thing kind of selfish.
Well, yeah, it can become just completely self-involved, and then you find out. I feel like you can only truly know yourself in context of other people, because every new person I meet, which I love meeting new people, I love, like we met yesterday in a coffee shop, and here we are, and I love that because I feel like I learn something and take something away from each person, hopefully giving something to them too. Right. But that's at least for me, I feel like that's the only way to truly get to know really who I am or who I want to be one day. So I hear you say kind of this word a lot in there, and it's happy, and what's making you happy. And it seems almost cliche, but it's the thing I keep coming back to. It's like, at the end of the day, how can you position your life so that you can find joy and find happiness? And that, but I was just thinking about your son saying that with the violin. I imagine that felt really good as a dad.
It did.
To hear him.
It did. Yeah, I felt like it all paid off.
Yeah.
And it helps him still today, I think.
Yeah.
I hope. And I hope it helps my other students as well.
I'm sure it does.
They make some sort of connection. And I have no hopes or like preconceived hopes that my students go on and be concert violinists.
Yeah.
I just hope, like Suzuki said, that it nurtures a kind heart, gentle soul.
Mm-hmm.
And I have had some students go on college and play violin, be violin majors. There's one of my students right now, I'm so proud of him. He's in the symphony here.
Nice.
And in both the symphonies. And so that's pretty neat.
And that's a gift, even if he becomes a lawyer or a doctor, whatever he ends up doing, if it's not professionally violin, mm-hmm. he could still continue to play violin, right. even in a symphony, if he can make the time. I have a buddy who's a lawyer, like high-end law firm, but he's a brilliant singer. And he found a way where he still practices law, and then him and his family, they do musicals, mm-hmm. like the big musicals in Kansas City, and so basically that's their lives during the summer together as a family, and then he's able to make it work, and that's what's cool about music. It can keep going in so many different capacities.
Right.
But now, good.
Yeah,
sorry.
I think some people, they have hobbies, and we have music, and I think music is. My dad collects stamps, and he loves his stamp collection and everything. I never really saw the purpose in those little.
You're like, yeah, it's cool day.
But music to me, it's more obscure, and I don't think some people get it. But I've hardly ever met. I don't think I've ever met a person who doesn't like music.
Right.
They like it. They might not be able to perform, but
mm-hmm.
they like it, and that's one thing I got from my dad. He'd love to sing. He couldn't sing very well, but he loved to sing. And he used to sing me songs that I realized were Woody Guthrie songs.
Yeah. And you told me about the Woody Guthrie Museum.
Yeah, and I moved
unfortunately, I can't check it out. I got to right after this. I'm headed to Austin, but I'll have to next time coming through. Yeah. That'd be cool. But that right here in Tulsa as well.
It's just amazing. But music, I always think of the movie Young Frankenstein. Where he's doing this, trying to capture the music in his hands. We as musicians, we make something vibrate and send these vibrations through the air molecules that bounce off of our ear and gets translated into music, and then somehow we have to make it emotional. When I was younger, my teachers would talk about tone, and I was like, "What's tone?" That sound production thing, and deep tone. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And then I had a teacher later when I was studying how to teach. He used to say, amount of bow hair equals amount of energy. And I'm like, energy and tone. But the one thing that you can't teach is emotion.
Yeah.
How to put emotion in music.
You can inspire it, I think, but right. No, I feel what you're saying.
I've had students who play very beautifully, but they don't play with emotion.
Yeah.
I've had students who play with such emotion it brings me to tears.
Well, I've seen that where vocalists who are every note's perfect, but they're disconnected. Or you see this rock guy or whatever jazz girl, whoever. It may not be perfect, but again, the way they're conveying it, their body, their emotion behind it, hits you in a way that's like, wow.
And you can't write that on the page.
There's a thought I wrote it down in the gym this morning. I was listening to this podcast, and they're studying this girl there's a certain kind of synesthesia where they actually feel where like synesthesia where right. you see music as color,
right.
but there's an actual brain dysfunction is what they call it, of if I see someone hug you and I have this ailment, I literally feel, even your brain's firing as if you feel someone hug you.
Right.
So it becomes compounded.
Empath.
What's that?
Empath.
In a way, right?
Right.
They've done neuroscience, have done a lot of studies on it. It's a very fascinating podcast, but they boiled it down to where the girl said, who they interviewed, who had this thing, one of the girls, and she said, I feel like thoughts or matter, and that's what hit me, where it's like for her to have a thought or to see something, it actually becomes like this physical matter that impacts her. That made me think of music, where it is that, it was Bob Marley. When it hits you, you don't feel pain, and it's, I don't know, it's probably, I'll be thinking about that thought, I'm sure, all for like the next 7 hours, but it hits upon what you're saying to me
I
in a way.
totally believe in it, and I think a lot of it comes down to observation skills. My mentors of teachers who I felt were very good teachers were very good at their observation skills. One of my teachers, Craig Timmerman, he would take like a minute to respond and to somebody, and I always wish I was that patient in my response to students. I talk too much. American teachers talk too much. That's what Japanese teachers say. But I think his observation skills, when we were in a class, pedagogy class, we were observing him teach. And afterwards we met in our class, and he said, "What did you notice?" And the teachers were responding, "Well, you worked with them with this, you did this." And I raised my hand and I said, "You never once looked at their fingers or their bow." And he smiled and he said, "What was I looking at?" I said, "You were looking at their eyes. You were looking at the students' eyes the whole time." And he said, "The eyes are a window into their soul, into what they are thinking about." And so I put that into my practice, watching, and every once in a while I'm like watching the fingers. I'm like, well, let's rely on our other senses. I talk to my students about their senses. I'm like, what are your senses? Do you use your sense of smell for playing? Do you use your sense of taste? No. You use your eyes, your ears, your sense of touch, and sense of touch in different ways, not just this, but this.
Yeah.
Being a violinist, you're constantly should be feeling these next to each other.
Right.
And then there's that sixth sense, right? Mind reading. We kind of joke about that, but that is a lot of observation skills. Being able to notice body language,
these little things
like that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm trying to figure out how I should sit right now.
No, I get that.
So,
are you familiar with the book called Talent Code by Daniel Coyle?
No, I'm not.
Amazing book where they break down the top performers in music, in sports, and in math throughout the world. And then they try to distill what makes them so great in their own studies. And it's a fascinating book. But one of the things they traced down to the musicians was all of them, every single one of these top performers could trace back to their first teacher. And almost every single one of them, the first teacher wasn't the greatest teacher in, upscale New York City at $1,000 an hour. It was this teacher who just simply cared about them and instilled a passion for music.
Right.
And there's a lot of inferences, just like any kind of book. But I thought that was really interesting to me that literally some of the greatest performers, even down like pop world, classical world, everything, it came down to this teacher who just cared about them and instilled that passion.
Right.
And it sounds like you're instilling that kind of passion in a lot of other students as well.
I hope.
Because it's that love, I think, that drives it. Like for me, the things I do is like on tour and like my family's at home and like all these different things. There's so many things wrapped up into it. But there's just, I've tried so many things in my life where it's like, this is the only thing where I really find joy and where I'm not miserable every day, and where I it's like it's that passion that pushes you through those long nights, the hard things, the emotions, and as artists, at least for me, I know I can be super emotional, but we've kind of hit on this, but Live and Create is kind of the name of the podcast, and in the end trying to figure out what do people think living a great life is, creating great things. So and it's always fascinating as I'm starting to do more of these interviews because we kind of hit on the topics as we have the conversations. But if you had to distill it down, what does living a great life mean to you?
Being able to express yourself. Being able to love what you do. Trying to be happy along the way.
Yeah.
I think.
Still, and that's what's interesting is people are tagging it too, where I think it's like this constant learning and growing for a lot of us too. But
yeah, because again, some of my teachers have instilled that in me, that you never stop learning. One of my teachers said, teachers to be wary of are the ones who think that they know everything.
Yeah.
And just the last few days, I've been here at the Jazz Hall watching a great conductor teach. We had a 3-day workshop, a conductor workshop, and even though I'm not conducting anymore, right now we each got to do a little conducting, and just all the subtle motions, how you use your wrist, and how just so many great things. He said 70,000 thoughts go through your mind every day, so we should write things down.
That's true.
Everything happens before it happens. He said that was a Casals quote as well.
I like
Everything
that.
happens before it happens. And so if you want people to play loud, you better tell them the beat before that you want them to play loud the next beat.
I like
But
it.
that extends to life too. I mean, so many of these things extend to life.
That's true. Everything happens before it happens.
Yeah.
Plus, I think about performance, even like jazz world. I spent a very brief time studying jazz in college, long enough to find out I'm not a jazz player. But I found a love for the music in that, but I knew, it's like, I think I'm more of a rock guy because I seen the new cats coming in and they're kicking my ass on the guitar. But that was the thing. It's the greatest ones were the ones who were spending 8 to 10 hours a day in the practice room. There was one dude, brilliant saxophonist, freshman, coming in, but just slamming it. Every concert, all improv, but every day.
Yeah.
In the McCain Auditorium is where I went to school, and so I've lived my life in that building for a few years. And in the morning, I get there 7 a.m. right before class. He's coming out of the practice room. I'd get lunch, come back, he's coming out of the practice room. I'd be there late at night, get ready to do some drills and whatever, and he's still coming out of the practice room.
10,000 hours.
He prepared. The only way he could execute in that moment was he decided, I'm going to be ready for that moment. And I like that. Everything happens before it happens.
You could talk about the Beatles again, 10,000 hours put in Hamburg before they even recorded, and 2 albums a year for many years.
Yeah, that story is so inspiring. Of like for me, I talk about hustle a lot on my social media stuff, and that's for me. I went to that season where it's just okay, I need to become a better writer, so let me write more. I'm in a different phase now where I'm trying now to hone down and really craft each word, each moment, and then also starting to do like co-writes and that kind of stuff. But yeah, doing these different seasons of just dig in. If you want to learn it,
there are a few special people in the world. Fritz Kreisler was one of them, great violinist. I heard a story about him that and there's quotes that he didn't practice.
That's crazy. That's like Wes Montgomery. I heard about that, where he just never would practice. I was like, oh man, you had to be that guy.
Now I wonder what they would have been like if they would have.
That's true.
But because that kind of fools your mind too when you have that ability. A story about Chrysler I heard was that his wife was like, you need to practice. And so she would lock him in his room. And then she realized he was going out the window down the fire escape. And so she would lock him in his room without his pants.
To make him
practice. And, he would get a manuscript, some piece that he never played before, study it on the train, get to the concert hall and play it.
See, that's wild. Yeah, there are those people who they just do it, and you're like,
and I've had students like that too. It fools them into the idea that they don't need to practice, or they don't need to practice efficiently.
Yeah,
because it comes so easy for them. And they still need to, more than ever. It's like teaching adult students too. They're like, I'm an adult. I shouldn't have to do this like these many repetitions as those little children that are playing circles around me. It's like, no, you actually need to do more because of your brain chemistry and your synapses.
It's producing myelin slower and all sorts of things. So creating great things. Yeah. What does that look like to you?
Creating great things. I've created songs before, tunes and whatnot. that doesn't have emotion. And I think I've gotten more in touch with emotion and putting it into music.
Yeah.
Some people have helped me with that, either positively or negatively.
They contributed in one way or the other.
But you know when you play a note, you know, there's a lot that you can do with it. You could just play, you know, you could start it lightly and increase the tone. You can start the vibrato very still and then increase the vibrato. You know, and that's, you get more emotion out of those different variables, but it's still just mechanics. There has to be something.
But how you apply those mechanics
coming out
in an emotional way.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what I've been wrestling a lot with, lyrical choices as I'm writing my next batch of songs that I hope to release in 2020. And as I dig into different artists that I love, I'm trying to study them, trying to study why they, you know, ask why did they make that choice? Why did they? And I keep coming back to they simply had something to say.
Right.
And I think I hit a wall for a season where I don't think I had anything new to say. So, and even a good friend of mine, his producer, he's like, you need to stop writing. You need to go take your kids to the park and go have fun. And you need to go out and experience life, because essentially I think he was trying to say in his own way, like, you have nothing left to say because you're I guess I was just wrapping myself up in the work as opposed to the passion and the life and bringing that across in creation. But that's cool to hear the different. It's one note, but each one distinctly so different. And that's
And then what harmony you put with that and everything. I mean, there's only 12 notes, you know, and with Western music, wait, how many possibilities can you know, there's a joke about Irish music that there's only one Irish jig. It's the same notes, different order. And a lot of people hear it like that too. They're just like, oh, another Irish jig.
It's like AC/DC, they played the same song for 20-something years, essentially.
It did.
And it still connects with a lot of people.
It does,
and it gets them hyped, you know? Like, hey, we got a new album. It's the same song for 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And but they're saying something that's connected to a group of people and everything. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for making the time.
Oh, sure.
I love the conversation, and definitely next time I come through Tulsa, have to connect and and hear how things are progressing for you, man. That's great.
It's so nice to meet you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, so these are two tunes. The first one is called The Farmer of Florence. I wrote it when I was writing my 33 tunes in a row. This was the fourth day, and it's named after my uncle from Florence, South Dakota, who died on that day. And then I'll go into another tune, a jig called The Beginning, which was the first one I wrote. The last one was called The End. Actually, it wasn't the last one. The last one was called Okay, That's Enough, because another tune popped into my head the next day. Okay, so here's The Farmer of Florence.
Thank you for listening to the Live and Create podcast. If you like what you heard, make sure you subscribe and leave a comment or a review.
The Live and Create podcast.